The judges were seeking a factual account of the operation of the Auschwitz camp. Charles Dubost therefore called Marie-Claude Vaillant Couturier to the stand. Deported to Birkenau for resistance activities, she wished to speak in the name of her fellow prisoners and comrades who did not come back, and she took a long time over her deposition, which she had memorized.
We arrived in Auschwitz in the early morning. Our train cars were unsealed, and we were forced out while being beaten with sticks. We were to go to the Birkenau Camp, which is part of the Auschwitz camp. We made our way there, dragging our luggage. When we walked under the porch, we felt there was little chance of our ever coming out again. We had already seen the skeletal columns of workers going to their work. So we entered, singing the French national anthem, La Marseillaise, to give us courage.
Our heads were shaved and our registration numbers were tattooed on the left forearm. Then we were taken into a large room for a steam bath and a cold shower. In spite of the fact that we were naked, all of this took place in the presence of SS men and women. We were then given clothing that was soiled and torn, a cotton dress and jacket of the same material. As all of this had taken several hours, we saw from the windows of the block where we were the men's camp, and toward the evening an orchestra came in. It was snowing and we wondered why they were playing music. Then we saw that the camp foremen were returning to the camp. Each foreman was followed by men who were carrying the dead. As they could hardly drag themselves along, every time they stumbled, they were put on their feet again by being kicked or by blows with the butt end of a rifle. For more than 3 months, we did not change our clothes. When there was snow, we melted some to wash in. Later in the spring, when we went to work, we would drink from a puddle by the roadside and then wash our underclothes in it. We took turns washing our hands in this dirty water. Our companions were dying of thirst because we got only half a cup of some herb tea twice a day.
Please describe in detail one of the roll calls at the beginning of February.
On February 5th, there was what is called a general roll call. In the morning at 3:30, the whole camp was awakened and sent out on the plain, whereas normally the roll call was at 3:30, but inside the camp. We remained out in front of the camp until 5 in the afternoon in the snow without any food. When all the internees were back in the camp, a party to which I belonged was organized to go and pick up the bodies of the dead that were scattered over the plain as on a battlefield. We carried the dead and dying to the yard of Block 25 without distinction, and they remained there stacked up in a pile. Block 25, which was the anteroom of the gas chamber, if one may express it so, is well known to me because at that time we had been transferred to Block 26 and our windows opened on the yard of number 25. There were stacks of corpses piled up in the courtyard, and from time to time a hand or a head would stir among the bodies trying to free itself. It was a dying woman attempting to get free and live. The rate of mortality in that block was even more terrible than elsewhere because, having been condemned to death, they received food or drink only if there was something left in the cans in the kitchen, which means that very often they went for several days without a drop of water. When we first arrived, whenever a convoy of Jews came, a selection was made. First the old men and women, then the mothers and children were put into trucks together with the sick or those whose health appeared to be delicate. They took in only the young women and girls, as well as the young men who were sent to the men's camp. Generally speaking, of a convoy of about 1,000 to 1,500, seldom more than 250, and this figure really was the maximum, actually reached the camp. The rest were immediately sent to the gas chamber. At this selection, they also picked out women in good health between the ages of 20 and 30 who were sent to the experimental block, and young girls and slightly older women, or those who had not been selected for that purpose, were sent to the camp where, like ourselves, they were tattooed and shaved. In the spring of 1944, there was also a special block for twins. That was during the time when large convoys of Hungarian Jews arrived, about 700,000. Dr. Mengele, who was carrying out the experiments, kept back from each convoy twin children and twins in general, regardless of their age, so long as both were present. So we had both babies and adults on the floor at that block. Apart from blood tests and measuring, I do not know what was done to them.
Are you a direct witness of the selection when the convoys arrived?
Yes. Because when we worked in the sewing block in 1944, the block where we lived was opposite the train's arrival point. The system had been perfected by then, since instead of making the selection at the train platform, a siding took the train almost to the gas chamber. The stopping point, which was some 50 or 100 meters from the gas chamber, was right in front of our block, but of course separated by 2 rows of barbed wire. We therefore saw the train cars being unsealed, the soldiers getting men, women, and children down off the train. We saw heartbreaking scenes, elderly couples being separated, mothers obliged to abandon their young daughters, since the girls would be taken into the camp, while mothers and children were herded towards the gas chamber. None of these people were aware of the fate that was to befall them. They were in distress simply because they were being separated from one another, but they did not know that they were going to their deaths. One night, we were awakened by agonizing screams. And the next morning, we learned from the...
You're going too fast.
Sorry. One night, we were awakened by agonizing screams. We learned the next morning from the men who worked at the Sonderkommando, the gas chamber command unit, that the night before, supplies of gas were low, and that they had therefore thrown the children into the ovens alive.
There were also executions in the camps. The numbers were called at roll call in the morning, and the victims then left for the Kommandatur and were never seen again. A few days later, the clothes were sent down to the Effektenkammer, where the clothes of the internees were kept. After a certain time, their cards would vanish from the filing cabinets in the camp.
The system of detention was the same as at Auschwitz?
No. In Auschwitz, obviously, extermination was the sole aim and object. Nobody was at all interested in the work output. We were beaten for no reason whatsoever. It was sufficient to stand from morning till evening, but whether we carried 1 brick or 10 was of no importance at all.
Though the defense kept a low profile, it tried to cast doubt on what she reported to have seen.
Trugen Sie lediglich Ihre eigenen Beobachtungen vor, oder handelt es sich?
Are these your own observations, or are you reporting things you may have heard from a third party?
Chaque fois que c'est le cas, je l'ai signalé dans ma déclaration.
Whenever that has been the case, I said so in my statement. I have never cited anything that was not verified at the source and by a number of witnesses. The major part of my statement is a personal account.
Despite the constraints of simultaneous translation and the often untimely interruptions, her testimony held the courtroom spellbound.
Question you wish to ask in examination?
I have no further questions, Mr. President.
Then the witness may retire.
For her, the best was yet to come. Walking past Goering and staring him in the face.